Welcome to the Yosemite Server Backup Refresher course for the Fred C Data Center. This is designed as an overview of Yosemite for users that have had Yosemite for some time, maybe haven't used it in a while. So it just kind of walks through the various aspects of Yosemite and gives you a refresher on how it's used for the purposes of archival of your case and evidence for evidence retention compliance. Here's the main screen of the Yosemite client. This is the tool that's used to create and manage the backups. This software can be installed on any workstation that's connected to the Fred C network. You can see on the main screen here there are options for backup, restore, verify, and the devices. Before we can actually use the software to do a backup, we need to see how the loader is represented in the software. So let's take a look at the devices. On some versions of Yosemite, this middle window here isn't normally open, but I recommend that there's an option to keep it open, and I recommend you select that option. Let's drill down. There's the Fred C, there's devices, and here's the library or loader itself. It consists of a tape drive, right? We can see some information. This particular one is an LTO7 tape drive. And the other important one here is the actual storage slots. This particular example, I've got only 4 storage slots, but you'll typically have 16 or maybe even 24. The devices view is useful to manipulate the tapes to identify where a particular tape is, in other words, what slot a tape is. You can use this view to initiate a cleaning cycle if necessary, although the loader is designed to clean itself when necessary. Once a tape is known to the system, you don't really need the devices view. In other words, it doesn't really matter what slot a particular tape is in. Right now, we're in kind of an initial phase here where all of these slots basically have a known tape in them, but it has no idea about the tape or anything like that. Before we get into it, I like to normally kind of change this up a little bit. So I can change these column names. So I'm moving the media column here. And the element status, and I don't need this media column anymore. Or I typically don't use this action or throughput. But I do like to keep the element ID, and the reason is that if I sort it by the name here, in this case I would get it in the correct order, but as we get into slot number 10, 11, and 12, this sort won't work. So I like to sort it by element ID just to kind of keep things organized in slot number order. As I mentioned, the tapes are essentially uninitialized, right? So the first thing we have to do when we have either unknown or blank tapes in the system is we have to format them. So I can highlight an individual slot and click the format command. Now you have to use the device view here to select the tapes that you want to format because it doesn't know anything about the tapes themselves. So if I wanted to format this tape in slot 1, I could just highlight that and click the format command. But you can do more than one tape at a time by using some of the Windows multiple select keys. So here now I've selected all 4 of these tapes, and I'm going to format them all in essentially one job. So click format. You'll notice that the name is new media, and the folder or container that they're going to be located in is a folder called formatted media. So I go ahead and click run, and off it goes. It's going to start to do its thing. While the job is running, we can monitor it using status and logs. You can see I've highlighted the job here, and it's just about finished. So after about 8 minutes or so, it's formatted all 4 of these tapes. Right now it says it's moving the last tape back to storage slot number 4. So shortly it'll be complete. And there we go. Now the job's complete, and we can go back and see what's going on in the devices view. Here we go. Slots 1 through 4, new media sub 1, sub 2, sub 3. Now what's this mean? Clearly this sub 1 does not match the slot number. Instead, this is a file naming collision avoidance mechanism. So let me show you what that means. If I go to Jobs and Media and expand the formatted media, I can see that this folder, which is or container, contains the 4 tapes. Now again, if these were all called new media, these names would collide with each other, right? They couldn't all be called new media. So when the system sees that when I do a batch job like this and the system sees that there's already a new media here, it just appends on this sub 1, sub 2, sub 3 so that these can all exist in this folder together. Alright, now that we've got some formatted tapes, let's put them to use. Let's make a backup job to back up case 1. From my workstation, I'm using Windows Explorer to look at my external RAID array. That's where your casework and evidence should be stored on the FredC system. Here's the case I'm interested in. I've called it case 1. If I right-click on it and look at the properties, I can see that it's 31 gig. That's pretty small, right? Sometimes cases are hundreds of gig or even terabytes. But for the demonstration, 31 gig is a nice size. It'll back up quickly. The idea here, though, is to see how big the case is and determine how many tapes we're going to need. These tapes are LTO7 tapes, and LTO7 tapes hold 6 terabytes of compressed data. So that's pretty easy to calculate that we'll only need 1 tape for this backup job. Okay, we're back at the task screen. Let's select backup. We'll just call this backup job, or maybe we'll change it a little bit. Now on the left side here we have a couple of menu options that we have to work through. The first one is selection, which basically is asking us what we want to back up. So as I'm exploring through the FredC here, I see, oh, this is kind of confusing. This looks like the Linux file system. If you remember, the FredC is indeed Linux based, so it doesn't have any idea where a V drive is. On this particular system, the V drive is connected to MNT. X-RAIDs, X-RAID 1, oh, and here we go. So here's my case 1. Device, we can expand out tape devices and select the tape device that's in the loader. Typically you only have 1 tape device on a FredC. We can skip encryption here. If we wanted to do encryption, if we were sending a tape through some third-party service where we didn't have control of it, we might want to encrypt the contents. But if the tape is going to be remaining within our forensic environment, we will not encrypt it. Here's the configuration information about the backup job. These are really important settings controlling the scheduling, the type of backup, and the media allocation aspects of the job. Let's take a look at the settings. This particular job is currently not scheduled, which means that when we save the job, it won't run unless we run it manually or run it now. Some of the scheduling options are run on selected days or run repeatedly. For archival purposes, we're going to want to run on selected days. This gives us the option to run it one time and essentially one time only. Select the calendar, pick the day in question, and click OK. We could add additional days on here, but if we wanted to run a job, let's say every Friday, this would not be the mechanism we'd use. A look at the backup modes involve the copy or full, incremental or differential, verification options, and whether we're going to overwrite or append to the media. These options are used in very sophisticated backup strategies, but again, for our archival purposes, we're going to want to choose the following. First, we're going to use copy. Copy basically says whatever we tell it to back up, back it up. That sounds simple, but there are some very sophisticated mechanisms for doing what are called full or incremental or differential backups. These backups involve updating the Yosemite database to keep track of when a file was backed up to determine if it's been changed or not. Since we're just doing a essentially unconditional backup, we're going to use the copy option. Verification, right? We can do full verify, quick verify, or no verify. Full verify means back the data up to the tape, rewind the tape, read the data again, and perform a checksum on the data to confirm that it's there accurately. Quick Verify writes the data to the tape, rewinds the tape, reads the data again, does not do a checksum, but does confirm that the files are indeed on the tape. Lastly, No Verify. That sounds a little dangerous, right? Write the files to the tape and you're done. A few words on No Verify, right? The LTO technology that we're using in our libraries have a read head positioned downstream of the read-write head in the tape drive itself. What this allows the tape drive to do essentially is automatically verify the data as it's writing the data to the tape. This means that it can detect errors and correct errors by itself at a hardware level essentially instead of at the software level. So if we tell the Yosemite software not to verify, the tape drive itself is still going to do a verify at the hardware level. However, I wouldn't set the No Verify option if you are doing an archive, because the logs for the software will indicate that the setting was to verify the tape, and you don't want to explain to somebody the intricacies of the LTO 8 or 7 tape technology and its ability to autocorrect. So if you're doing your own personal backup or a system backup for our purposes, you can use the No Verify option because it saves a lot of time. It just has to make one pass through the tape instead of multiple passes. But if you're doing a backup for archival purposes, for evidence retention, the smart thing to do is to do a full verify, which does the backup and then does a checksum of the files on the tape to confirm that the files are indeed on the tape in their unaltered format. Lastly, in the modes discussion, let's talk about the write mode. By default, it says append to all media. What this means is that it will mount a tape and then advance to the end of the tape and write the new data at the end of the last backup set. For archiving purposes, this is a really bad idea. The reason is that if you append data to a tape and append data to a tape and then accidentally overwrite the tape, all that appended data is going to be gone. Instead, what we want to do is we want to overwrite the media. What this means is that essentially the media will be quick formatted, similar to like a hard drive quick format, at the beginning of the backup job, and the data that's written to this tape from this job will be the only data that's available for restoration on this particular tape. So let's talk about tape allocation, which is under media to be used. You can see here it kind of refers to a home admin case 1 backup job, essentially referring to a container that's the same name as the backup job. The idea here is that this job will look in this folder or this container for any media to be used for this backup. So part of this process is to allocate media to this job by moving it from wherever it's located in this folder tree to the backup job itself, and we'll show you that in a minute. But it's really important to note that the backup job itself does not specify the specific media or tapes it's going to use. It specifies where to look for these particular tapes. Lastly, we can look at the advanced options. The defaults are fine, except for we have to remember, if possible, to uncheck this Create DR Bootable Media option. What this would do would be to prompt the user for the insertion of rewritable media like a CD-ROM or something like that. And since we have our own disaster recovery environment in the FredC ecosystem, we don't need this software to try and attempt to create a disaster recovery bootable media. After clicking OK, our job's now complete. Let's do the tape allocation. Select Jobs and Media. Here's our backup job. And you can see that we've got under Formatted Media some new media that we talked about earlier. I'm going to go into Formatted Media and I'm going to select a single tape and I'm going to move it to the Case 1 backup job. Now you can see if I expand the Case 1 backup job that new media, that tape that happens to be in slot 1, is now allocated or contained within the folder Case 1 backup job. If we needed more than one tape for this backup job, or if we thought we did, we could easily move some additional tapes into this job using the same mechanism. Now that the media is allocated, we can go ahead and run the backup job. If you remember, we had scheduled the job to run on a specific date, but we can also just run it manually. Highlight the backup job itself and click Run. If we go to Status and Logs now, we should see the job running. The first thing it does is it identifies the media. Basically, that means it goes to the folder where the media for this backup is to be stored, and it selects a media if there's more than one in there, and then it looks at the magnetic label on the media itself. This is to ensure that the media is what the backup software expects it to be. In other words, the barcode matches the database that the backup software keeps, and the magnetic label matches the barcode, so everything is all in sync. Alright, the backup job is completed. If we double click on the entry, we can look at the log. Here you can see information about the settings that we used to perform the backup, the number of items that were backed up, and the amount of data that was backed up. If we scroll down a little further, we can see some of the timing, how long the backup took, and importantly, we can see the tape or tapes that the backup used. In this case, it just used one tape that was labeled 0001. You can see that there was essentially no compression, and again, that's because the evidence, or the simulated evidence in this case, is uncompressible already, so it's not going to compress any further. We also have the option to save the log to a disk or HTML file, or print the log out as needed. The next thing that we want to do is we want to rename this media here, so I'm just going to go on here and rename it, and I'm going to name it to something that makes sense to me. So I'm going to call it Case 1 Backup Media, and I'm going to make sure to include the barcode, which is LAB00001L7, and I'll tell you why that's important later on. You might also go, tape 1 of 1 or something along those lines, whatever standard you want to use. Now that it's labeled properly, we want to maybe deallocate this tape from the job. Remember, the jobs and the tapes themselves are not connected, right? The jobs look to themselves for tapes to use. But let's take this tape away from the job, and we do that by moving it. So I've created a folder called Online Media. And Online Media stores the tapes, or has tapes here that are in the loader, hence they're online, but not allocated to jobs. I've also created an Offline Media folder, and that's where we'll move tapes that are no longer in the loader and essentially are in long-term offline storage. One of the things I did want to point out is that some of these folders are used for organizational purposes and some for allocation purposes, right? So the Offline Media folder is used for organization, and Online Media is used for organization. When we move a tape between one and another, we're not physically moving it anywhere. We're just basically giving it to or taking it away from a particular job and putting it in a storage location. Alright, so let's assume that we've now completed our archive, and we're going to free up some space on our RAID array. So here's case 1, and I'm going to delete it. Of course, lo and behold, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to need to restore it for something. So let's create a restore job. We're back in the Yosemite Server Backup interface, and normally if we were doing a restore, some time would have passed and the tape would likely be in the archive vault and the evidence vault. So for this example, let's assume that we've consulted our documentation to determine what tape we need, and retrieved it from the vault and inserted it into the loader, and we've moved it from offline media to online media, indicating that it is now in the loader and online. So let's go ahead and create that restore job now. New restore job. We'll just call it case 1 restore job here. And similar to the backups, we have a number of questions we have to answer. The first one is selection. So here we go, going down the Fred C. Now notice that as we go through the Fred C file system, we're not seeing all the file system, right? We're just seeing things that have been backed up, right? And in this case, the only thing that's been backed up here is our case 1. So I can just select case 1 here. Now note that with all these files selected, down here it displays the tape or tapes that those files are on. And if I expand this up a little bit, you can see the reason that we put the barcode label in the name of the tape, because here we can see right here the barcode that we're going to need, and hopefully that agrees with our records. The next thing we'll select is tape devices, and we've only got one, but let's go ahead and select it implicitly. In configuration, there's not too many options. However, we could schedule it to run at a particular time, but generally if you're going to restore something, you want it right now. So we're good to go. With the configuration of the restore job completed, we can go ahead and highlight it and run it. So let's do that. Are we sure? You bet. And we can monitor its progress and status and logs. Here's our restore job. We can click on this. We can actually see what's happening. First thing it's doing is identifying the media, right? So it goes out to the loader. In this case, again, it knows the tape we're interested in, but it's going to confirm that this is really the tape we want by reading the magnetic label that's on the tape itself. Once it's identified the tape as being the correct one, it starts actually restoring the files, and you can see it's now reading the data from the tape and restoring it back to the system. It's already done 4 of the files, and it'll be done shortly. And now it's just about done, and you can see the throughput is about 12 gig a minute, which includes the time it has taken for it to actually retrieve the tape and mount it in the tape drive itself. And so, but you can see the throughput's pretty good. Pretty much as fast as regular writing or retrieving it from rotational media. And now the job is completed, and my files are all back. You'll note that they have their original dates and times, so we should be all good to go. So again, the backup job is completed, so let's do a little housework here. Go to Jobs and Media. We'll take our Notice that the tape itself just stayed in the online media folder. There was no reason, or there's no mechanism for allocating it, right? The restore job knows where the tape is, and so it doesn't have to be explicitly moved to the job. But now let's clean things up a little bit. So let's move the tape back to its offline media in preparation for removing it from the loader. All right, so there we go. And the next thing we want to do is we actually want to use the software to take the tape from the slot that it's in, which happens to be slot 1, and move it to the mail slot. Alright, let's go to Devices View, Storage Slots, pick Storage Slot 1, and go to Move Media. Alright. There's Storage Slot 1. There's the import export slot, and run. Doesn't take very long for this particular loader, which again, this is a Qualstar, to move it. So there's the log of what happened. And now if we look here, there's the storage slot 1 is empty, and the export slot now has the tape in it that we're interested in. At this point, we'd go to the front panel of the loader and physically eject the tape and put it back in the long-term data storage. And this would be a great opportunity to grab a new tape and put a label on it, a barcode label on it, and insert it into the loader and format that tape so it's ready for use. This concludes the refresher course for the Yosemite Server Backup product. Hopefully it has jogged your memory and allowed you to revisit this software. Again, many times you'll use the Yosemite Server Backup software, and then not use it for a while, so hopefully this will be a nice bridge to help you get back in the process of making archival backups of your case and evidence for your evidence retention requirements. Thank you.